He's just an ornament for our party." I heard my own son say those words to his wife, right after boasting that he sends me an $8,000 allowance every month. As the room erupted in applause, I stood frozen, my mind flashing back to a meager dinner of canned beans and the eviction notice tucked in my pocket. That $8,000 wasn't just a lie. It was a public slap in the face. I wasn't his father anymore. I was just a prop for his ambition. But in that moment, I swore I would tear down the facade they had built. And when the truth came out, the entire room would fall silent. Can you even imagine what I did next? Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. The collar of the borrowed suit dug into my neck, a constant choking reminder that I didn't belong. Its polyester fabric, pressed into a stiff, unnatural smoothness, reeked of dry cleaning chemicals, not the familiar scent of cheap soap and honest sweat that had clung to me my entire life. The sleeves ran too long, swallowing the gnarled, calloused knuckles I'd earned over decades of labor, and I kept shoving my hands in my pockets to hide the ill fit, a futile attempt to blend in. Around me, the air was thick with expensive perfume, the leather of new wallets, and the fizz of champagne bubbling in delicate crystal flutes. I could hear the tinkling laughter, the casual talk of European vacations and stock market wins. This was my son Michael's world, a world built on numbers I could never count, a universe parallel to my own reality. I was standing in a quiet corner, trying to make myself invisible behind a Christmas tree that nearly touched the ceiling, adorned with glittering glass baubles and shimmering gold ribbons. Its twinkling lights cast shifting shadows on my face, making me feel like a ghost haunting my own family's celebration. But Michael wouldn't let me be. He strode over, a smile plastered on his face like a politician on a campaign poster, and slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into the center of the room. "Dad, you have to meet everyone," he said, his voice loud and performative, enough to make a few heads turn. The hand he placed on my shoulder felt alien. It wasn't the warm weight of affection, but the heavy grip of ownership, as if I were a prize stallion he was trotting out for display. I was his trophy, an ornament for his perfect evening. And then, the moment arrived. Michael plucked a glass from a passing waiter's tray and tapped it with his heavy gold ring, a clear, sharp sound that cut through the chatter. The room slowly fell silent. All eyes turned to him, and to me, the 57-year-old man standing beside him like a mute shadow, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," Michael began, his voice radiating the easy confidence of a man used to being heard. A confidence I'd once hoped he'd have, just not like this. "I want to take a moment to thank you all for being here to celebrate Christmas with us. But more importantly, I want to honor a very special man. The man who sacrificed everything so I could be here today. My father, Richard Bell." My heart skipped a beat. A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. Honor? The last time I'd felt honored was when I got a plaque for 20 years of perfect attendance at the old factory, right before it shut down. My dad worked his fingers to the bone his whole life. Michael continued, his eyes drifting toward a tall, salt and pepper-haired man standing next to my daughter-in-law, Sophia. That was Mr. Sterling, Michael's father-in-law, the president of a corporation whose name was plastered on skyscrapers all over Dallas. He worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to put me through school. And now that I'm in a position to, I want to make sure he has a comfortable retirement, free from any worries. He paused for dramatic effect, then raised his glass higher, the crystal catching the light and creating a small halo. "And so, I'm proud to say that every single month, I send my father an allowance of $8,000 so he can enjoy his life to the fullest." The room exploded in applause. I could hear murmurs of admiration, see the nods of approval. "What a wonderful son," someone whispered. "Michael is just incredible." I stood there frozen, a smile plastered on my face like a cheap mask. $8,000. The number echoed in my head like a mocking church bell. $8,000. The night before, my dinner had been 2 slices of bread with a single cheap slice of processed cheese. That morning, I'd added water to my shampoo bottle to make it last the week. My old Ford was making a death rattle every time I started it, and I knew I couldn't afford to get it fixed. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his usually stern face breaking into a satisfied smile. He shook my hand, a limp, dismissive gesture, then turned and clapped Michael firmly on the back. "Well done, son," he said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "I always knew you were a man of character. A man who takes care of his family knows how to take care of a business. We'll talk about that executive VP position after the holidays. I think you're ready." The mission was accomplished. I saw it in the triumphant glint in Michael's eye. And then I looked at Sophia. My daughter-in-law wasn't clapping. She just stood there, arms crossed, a smile as thin as a razor's edge on her lips. Her eyes met mine, and in that fleeting instant, I saw it all. Not pride, not warmth. It was cold, calculating contempt, the triumphant look of an architect admiring her flawless design. She knew I would stay silent. She was daring me to ruin the show. The party continued, but for me, it was over. I retreated to my corner, the air feeling thin and stolen from my lungs. Later, when no one was looking, I pulled Michael into an empty hallway where only the faint strains of classical music drifted in. "Michael," I started, my voice hoarse, trying to keep it from trembling. $8,000? What were you talking about? He sighed, the polished charm vanishing from his face, replaced by a flicker of impatience. "Dad, it's just a little white lie. Did you see how happy Mr. Sterling was? It was necessary." "Necessary? But it's not true. I haven't gotten a dime from you." "So what?" Michael snapped, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, his eyes darting around as if afraid of being overheard. "Just play along. It's for my image, for my future. All you have to do is nod and smile. Is that so hard? After everything I've done." He left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. After all the wealth I've brought to the family name. He didn't wait for an answer. He gave my shoulder a light pat, a gesture meant to seem affectionate but felt like a dismissal. And then he walked back toward the lights, the laughter, and the praise. I stood alone in the hallway, the smell of champagne and lies trailing after him. For my image. Those words cut deeper than any harsh truth. I wasn't his father anymore. I was just a part of the image he was building, an old brick he'd painted over to look presentable. I don't remember how I got home. The drive in my rickety old Ford seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Every pothole the car hit felt like a punch to the bruises forming in my chest. The heater had been broken since last winter, and I huddled inside my thin jacket, trying to hold on to what little warmth I had. The cold outside was nothing compared to the chill spreading from my heart. My apartment greeted me with its familiar silence and the faint smell of damp. I flicked a switch, and the weak yellow light from the single bulb in the living room illuminated peeling paint and a threadbare carpet. This was my kingdom, a world millions of miles away from crystal chandeliers and marble floors. I took off the borrowed suit, hanging it up carefully, afraid to wrinkle it. I had to return it to my neighbor tomorrow, along with a forced thank you. I opened the refrigerator. Inside was a nearly empty carton of milk, a few eggs, and half an onion. Dinner tonight, like most nights, was canned beans heated on the old electric stove. I sat at my small kitchen table, eating alone in silence, the metallic taste of the spoon mingling with the blandness of the beans. $8,000. How many cans of beans could I buy with that? I could fix the heater, replace the bald tires on my car, and maybe, just maybe, buy myself a new winter coat, one without tiny holes at the elbows. But that was just a fantasy, a lie spoken in a warm room by a son who had forgotten the smell of a cold apartment. I washed my single dish and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the scene from the party replaying in my mind, the applause, Mr. Sterling's smile, Sophia's icy gaze, and Michael's words, "Just play along." I tried. For the next few days, I tried to pretend it was all just a bad dream. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., put on my janitor's uniform, and went to the warehouse. I scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and drove the forklift until my back screamed in protest. I tried to drown the memories in physical exhaustion. Labor was an undeniable truth. The floor was dirty, and I made it clean. It was simple, honest work. There were no lies here. But the lie followed me like a ghost. It whispered to me as I stood at the grocery checkout, debating whether to buy the discounted meat. It mocked me as I filled my gas tank, putting in just enough to get me to work for 2 days. It was an invisible presence, a constant reminder of the chasm between my life and the story my son was telling about it. Then came the final straw. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and damp. I had just gotten home from a 10-hour shift, my body aching. As I checked my mailbox, tucked between the junk mail and the usual bills, was a red envelope. I recognized the seal of the building's management company. My heart seized with a familiar, sickening dread. I tore it open right there in the hallway, my fingers numb with cold. Inside was an official notice printed in a stern, bold font. Final eviction notice. The words swam before my eyes, blurring and then sharpening into focus. I was 2 months behind on rent. My landlord, a decent man, had given me some leeway, but his patience had run out. I had 72 hours to pay the full amount owed, $1,650, or pack my things and leave. $1,650. To me, right then, it might as well have been $1 million. I leaned against the wall, the paper crumpled in my trembling hand. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Where would I go? What would I do? And then, that other number appeared in my mind, huge and absurd, a final crushing insult. $8,000. The non-existent allowance, the perfect performance, my son's image, the humiliation, the pain, the confusion of the past few days suddenly crystallized into something else. Something cold, hard, and clear. Anger. A quiet, simmering rage that burned away every last shred of hesitation, every excuse I had tried to make for my son. He hadn't just lied. He had built his career on his own father's poverty while leaving me to face the threat of homelessness. He had used me as a stepping stone to climb higher, then kicked me away when he was done. Silence was no longer an option. Endurance was no longer a virtue. I walked into my apartment, straight to the old telephone on the table, not even bothering to take off my shoes. My hand was steady now. My finger dialed Michael's number with a grim determination. It rang once, twice. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew that this time I wouldn't let him deflect. I wouldn't accept another lie. I just knew I had to speak, that the invisible man he created at his party would be silent no more. The phone rang once, then twice. Each ring stretched for an eternity, echoing in the stillness of my apartment. I stood there, the receiver pressed hard against my ear, the eviction notice still clutched in my other hand, as crumpled as my dignity. I almost hoped he wouldn't pick up. A small, fatherly part of me still wanted to run from this confrontation, to believe in some absurd misunderstanding. Hello? Michael's voice came through, not the booming, confident tone from the party, but a low, busy murmur. Who is this? It's your father, Michael. A pause. I could hear the clatter of a keyboard on his end, then a soft, impatient sigh. Dad? What is it? I'm in the middle of something. I need to talk to you. It's important. How important? I have a meeting in 5 minutes. The annoyance in his voice was as plain as the cracks in my apartment walls. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own voice from breaking. They're going to evict me, Michael. I got an eviction notice. I owe them $1,650, and I only have 3 days to pay. Another pause, this one longer. The keyboard tapping stopped. Eviction? He repeated, as if the word belonged to a foreign language. How is that possible? I thought you were all taken care of. Taken care of? The anger I'd been trying to suppress began to boil over. Son, I'm living on canned beans. My car is dying. What taken care of are you talking about? At the party, you said $8,000? Dad, I told you finances are complicated. His voice shifted into a condescending tone, as if explaining a complex theory to a child. It's not as simple as cash deposited into an account every month. I set up a structure, a long-term investment plan for you, to secure your future. My future, I almost yelled. Michael, I don't have a future if I don't have a home next week. What structure? What plan? I need real money, Michael. I need to pay my rent. Okay, calm down, he said, his voice an oily attempt at soothing me, but the insincerity was palpable. Let me look into it. There must be some kind of paperwork mix-up. I'll have my accountant check it out and get back to you. When? I asked, my voice laced with desperation. I only have 3 days. I know. I'll be as quick as I can. I have to go to this meeting now, Dad. And then, before I could say another word, I heard the dry, empty click of the dial tone. He had hung up on me. I slowly lowered the receiver. The room seemed to darken. Look into it. Accountant, check it out. The words were brick walls he was building between us, soulless corporate jargon to mask a cruel reality. He wasn't going to help. There was no money. There was no structure. It was all a lie. The anger cooled, leaving a cold, hollow emptiness. The last, tiniest sliver of hope had been extinguished. I was completely and utterly alone. The next morning, I went to the warehouse with hollow eyes from a sleepless night. But something inside me had shifted. The desperation of the night before had given way to a terrifying clarity. The fog of denial and wishful thinking had burned away, leaving only the stark, ugly truth. I was no longer a hurt father. I was a man who was being defrauded, and I was not going to let it stand. I was stacking crates of cereal on a high shelf when Janet, my shift partner, came over. She was a woman in her 60s with a neat bun of silver hair and eyes that saw right through you. She'd worked here longer than anyone and had seen it all. You look like you've seen a ghost, Richard, she said, her voice low and warm. Rough night? Normally, I would have just nodded and changed the subject. I was a private man, never wanting to burden others with my troubles. But today, the defensive walls I had built around myself for years came crumbling down. I leaned against the shelf, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Worse than that, Janet, I whispered. And then, like a dam breaking, it all poured out. I told her about the Christmas party, the borrowed suit, Michael's grand announcement, and the look in Sophia's eyes. I told her about the broken-down car, the meager meals, the red eviction notice, and the cold, dismissive phone call from the night before. I told the story without looking her in the eye, ashamed of my poverty and my own naivete. When I finished, I expected a word of comfort, a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. But Janet didn't offer one. She was silent for a long moment, her face hardening. When she finally spoke, there was no pity in her voice, only steel. That's not a mix-up, Richard, she said flatly. I did the books for a small company for 15 years. I know the smell of cooked numbers. Using your father's name for a dependency claim without giving him a cent is called tax fraud. Promising a non-existent allowance to impress your in-laws is deception. That boy isn't just hurting you, he's breaking the law. The words fraud, deception, breaking the law hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I had only thought of betrayal. Janet had given a name to the monster I was facing. You can't handle this on your own, she continued. You need a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. You need someone tough, someone who isn't afraid of rich folks and big corporations. She paused, pulling a slip of paper and a pen from her pocket. There's a woman. Her name is Patricia Harding. She specializes in elder financial abuse. My daughter used to work for her. Patricia's not a warm and fuzzy person, but she's fair, and she hates bullies. She handed me the piece of paper with a name and number written in a clear, steady hand. Call her, Richard. Don't wait. You've been silent for too long. Patricia Harding's office was in a modest building downtown, a far cry from the glass and steel towers where Michael worked. But inside, the air hummed with a quiet professionalism. There were no expensive art pieces, only shelves overflowing with thick law books. I sat on the guest chair, my hands clasped together, feeling as out of place as I had at the Christmas party. The world of law was as foreign to me as the world of wealth. Then Patricia walked in. She wasn't what I had imagined. Not a cold woman in a power suit, but someone with short, graying hair, intelligent eyes, and a smile that was warm, but not weak. She shook my hand. It was a firm, solid grip. Mr. Bell, she said. Janet called me. Please tell me everything. And so I did, for the second time. But this time, it felt different. I was no longer ashamed. With Janet, I had been unburdening myself. With Patricia, I was presenting a case. She listened intently, nodding occasionally and jotting notes in a legal pad. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers, and looked me straight in the eye. Mr. Bell, your story is heartbreaking, she began. And based on what you've told me, I believe we have a very strong case on several fronts. Elder financial abuse, fraud, and possibly tax evasion on your son's part. She paused, letting the words sink in. But I have to be blunt with you. Your word, as honest as it is, isn't enough in a courtroom. We need proof, hard, undeniable proof. She stood up and paced the room, her voice gaining an edge. The legal system isn't built to easily protect men like you. They have money, the best lawyers, and they will do everything they can to paint you as a bitter, confused old man trying to extort money from his successful son. She turned back, her eyes boring into mine. So, our roles have to be very clear. I can build the case. I can map out the legal strategy. I can represent you in court. But you, Richard, you have to be the one to find the bricks to build that case. The court believes in evidence, and the most powerful evidence comes from the inside, from the person who lived and breathed the lie. Something in me shifted as I heard those words. For the first time since the party, I felt a spark of hope. Not the hope that things would be magically fixed, but the hope that I could do something. I was no longer just a victim. Patricia had given me a role, a purpose. But when I returned to my empty apartment, facing the eviction notice and a blank notebook, the weight of that role settled heavily upon me. I was a janitor, not a detective. I knew the difference between cleaning chemicals, not types of fraud. I knew how to operate a forklift, not an investigation. Michael and Sophia lived in a fortress of glass and steel, protected by expensive lawyers and walls of silence. How could a man with calloused hands and a worn-out jacket possibly breach it? For 2 days, I hesitated. I wrote down everything Patricia had told me, organized my own bills into a pitifully thin stack. But I couldn't bring myself to take the next step. The thought of confronting my son, not as a wounded father but as an accuser, paralyzed me. A father's love is a strange thing. It can endure neglect, forgetfulness, even betrayal, but it recoils at the idea of deliberately destroying the child it created. Then, on the third day, the last day before I had to leave my apartment, something pushed me. It wasn't courage. It was exhaustion. I was tired of being afraid. I was tired of feeling small and powerless. There was still one fragile hope, one last excuse I had manufactured for Michael. Maybe he really was trapped. Maybe Sophia was the true architect of this scheme, and he was just a pawn in her game. I needed to look him in the eye, not over the phone, but in person, to see if there was anything left of the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I decided to go to his office, not to start a fight, but to look for a sign, a crack in his perfect armor. I put on my best clothes, a faded but clean-pressed shirt, and drove my sputtering Ford downtown. The building where Michael worked was a monolithic tower of glass, reflecting the gray Dallas sky. I felt like an ant trying to infiltrate a termite mound. The lobby's reception desk was made of white marble, so polished I could see my own distorted reflection, a thin, out-of-place figure. The young receptionist eyed me with professional curiosity. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Michael Bell." "I'm his father," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident. Her eyebrows shot up in a flicker of surprise. Clearly, the executive vice president's father was not a regular visitor. She made a quick call. "Mr. Bell is in an important meeting, but it should be over in about an hour." His assistant said you're welcome to wait in his office. I was led through plushly carpeted hallways where the air was cool and smelled of success. Michael's office was bigger than my entire apartment. One wall was all glass, offering a panoramic view of the city. His desk was dark wood, as large and imposing as a throne. Everything was neat, cold, and impersonal. This was the space of a man in control, not a son. A young woman, Michael's assistant, came in with a cup of coffee. She had a kind smile. "Mr. Bell, I'm Sarah. Michael shouldn't be long. Please, make yourself comfortable." She seemed like a decent person, a rare spot of warmth in this sterile environment. I sat in a soft leather chair, feeling deeply uncomfortable. I looked around the room, searching for something familiar. A family photo, a gift I'd given him years ago. There was nothing. Only framed business awards and books on market strategy. About half an hour later, Sarah returned, holding a thick binder. "Mr. Bell," she said, sounding a bit rushed. "I have to run a quick errand, but my boss needs this file reviewed as soon as his meeting is over. Would you mind placing it on his desk and reminding him for me? I really trust you since you're his father." "Of course, young lady," I said. "No problem at all." She placed the binder on a small table next to me and hurried out. I sat there, staring at it. Payment records, Q4. Just boring numbers, I told myself. But an irresistible curiosity took hold. My hand trembled slightly as I flipped open the cover. Inside were dense spreadsheets. My eyes scanned past unfamiliar names and enormous figures. And then I saw it. A recurring entry dated the 15th of every month. Payee ST Holdings. Amount, $7,950. Almost exactly $8,000. My heart stopped, then began to pound in my chest. ST Holdings. Whatever it was, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't Richard Bell. The blood rushed to my head. This was it. This wasn't a mix-up. This was a deliberate act. I frantically flipped through more pages. The name ST Holdings was everywhere, not just for the nearly $8,000, but for many other, much larger payments noted as consulting fees and strategic marketing costs. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a single lie. This was a system. Patricia had told me to find the bricks, and now a whole brick wall was lying right in front of me. My hands shook, but a cold clarity took over my mind. A confrontation now would be useless. I needed proof. I slowly pulled my old smartphone from my pocket, trying not to make a sound. My heart was beating so loudly I was afraid it could be heard in the hallway. I opened the camera, fumbled to focus, and quickly took pictures of several key pages. The ones showing the ST Holdings name, the amounts, and the notations. I held my breath, listening to the faint electronic shutter click. It was done. I quickly closed the binder, smoothed it over, and placed it neatly back where it had been, as if untouched. Just then, the door opened and Michael walked in, loosening his tie. He looked tired, but flushed with the self-satisfaction of a successful meeting. "Dad? You've been waiting long?" he asked, his smile faltering slightly as he took in my shell-shocked expression. I looked straight at my son, not with anger, but with a profound sadness. "Michael," I asked, my voice heavy, "what's really going on?" He stopped short, clearly taken aback by my question and my tone. He couldn't see that the binder had been moved, but he could feel the shift in the air. The smile vanished, replaced by a guarded look. "What do you mean?" "It's just work." "Not the work," I said, shaking my head slowly. "Us. You. What's happening to you?" Michael let out a long, frustrated sigh. He walked around his desk and sank into his throne-like chair. "Dad, I'm under a lot of stress," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "The job, the pressure. You wouldn't understand. I'm trying to lock down this VP position. It's more important than you can imagine. I have to do what I have to do." He spoke vaguely about expectations, about maintaining an image, about struggles a man like me couldn't possibly comprehend. He offered no specifics, just the generic laments of a man who feels the weight of the world on his shoulders. But I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was just looking at him, really looking at him, at the expensive suit that encased him, the gold watch that glinted with every movement, and the eyes that constantly avoided mine. I realized then that the boy I had raised, the young man who had once been a regular office worker, who had shyly told me he was in love with his boss's daughter, was gone. The person sitting in front of me was a stranger, a creature forged by ambition, money, and perhaps by the woman he had married. The change was so profound, it was heartbreaking. I didn't argue. I didn't show him the pictures I had just taken. Trust was no longer the issue. The issue now was the truth I held in my phone and in my shattered heart. I slowly got to my feet. The luxurious office suddenly felt suffocating. "I understand," I said, my voice frighteningly even. The voice of a man who has accepted an irreversible loss. "I think I should go." I left his office without looking back. I knew I had just severed the last invisible thread between us. The love of a father had given way to the resolve of a man seeking justice. As soon as I was out of the building, I called Patricia. I told her about ST Holdings. "Good work, Richard," she said, not a hint of surprise in her voice. "This is the first brick. Now we go find out what it's made of." That afternoon, we met at the public library. The atmosphere was the complete opposite of Michael's office. It was quiet, humble, and filled with knowledge available to everyone, rich or poor. Patricia showed me how to access the state's public business filings database. I typed ST Holdings into the search bar. A few seconds later, the result appeared. ST Holdings, LLC. Date of incorporation, 2 years ago, right after Michael and Sophia were married. And then, under registered agent, my heart gave another lurch. The name wasn't Michael Bell. It was Sophia Torres. "Torres," I mumbled. That was her maiden name. Patricia nodded, her face impassive, but her eyes were sharp. Just as I thought. A shell corporation. Now let's see what it owns. We moved on to property records, and there we found it. ST Holdings was the legal owner of a luxury condominium in the Uptown district, purchased for cash 6 months ago. No mortgage. The price made my head spin. It was enough to pay my rent for 30 years. We printed everything. Holding the warm papers in my hand, I felt a cold certainty. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was evidence. Patricia pointed to another name on the incorporation document. Alan Croft, accountant. Who's that? I asked. He's probably our key, she said. An accountant knows where the numbers go. And the record shows he left the company 6 months ago. People who leave often take stories with them. Finding Alan Croft was harder. He wasn't in the phone book, and his social media accounts had been deleted. Patricia had to use a private investigator she trusted. It took nearly a week to get an address, a small apartment in the suburbs, and a phone number. Alan refused to see us. He was terrified. Over the phone, his voice trembled. He said he wanted nothing more to do with the Bells. He'd been wrongfully fired by Sophia and threatened into silence. But Patricia was persistent. She assured him of legal protection, and I told him, from one man's heart to another, that I wasn't looking for revenge, only for the truth. Finally, he agreed. We met in a discreet coffee shop where no one would notice us. Alan was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a nervous energy. He kept glancing at the door. I don't have much time, he said. We just need the truth, Alan, I said gently. And then he told us. What he revealed was more monstrous than anything I could have imagined. That $8,000 allowance? He said with a bitter laugh. That was just the tip of the iceberg, Mr. Bell. It was a piece of theater, a touching story to cover for something much, much bigger. Alan opened his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. I kept everything. I knew this day would come. He explained. Michael and Sophia weren't just deceiving me and her family. They were running a systematic scheme to embezzle money from the Sterling Corporation itself. ST Holdings was the hub of the entire operation. Sophia is brilliant, Alan said. She created fake service invoices from ST Holdings to the Sterling Corporation for services that never existed. Brand consulting, strategic market research. Michael, as an executive VP, would approve the payments. The money went straight from Sterling into their pockets. He continued, his voice filled with a quiet fury. But that wasn't all. The worst part was the phantom charity donations. They would announce huge contributions to hospitals, to orphanages. The press would praise them as philanthropists. But in reality, only a fraction of that money ever made it. The majority was funneled through a series of complex accounts and ended up right back in ST Holdings. They were stealing from sick kids and the poor, Mr. Bell. I sat there, stunned into silence. The small recorder in my pocket was running, capturing every horrifying word. The allowance for you, Alan concluded, was a sideshow. It both scored Michael points with his father-in-law and created a fake, legitimate-looking expense on the books to help hide the larger cash flows. It was a win-win, perfectly evil. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop and showed us the emails, the spreadsheets, the wire transfers. The numbers danced on the screen, a ballet of greed and deception. Millions of dollars. I looked at Alan's tired face. Why are you helping us? He stared out the window where rain had begun to fall. My grandmother worked her whole life to raise my mother. She was an honest woman. When Sophia asked me to cook the books, I saw my grandmother's face in yours. I couldn't do it, and I haven't slept well since. Leaving the coffee shop, the cold rain barely registered. Inside me, a much bigger storm was raging. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about $1,650 in rent or a lie at a party. It was about millions of stolen dollars, about a betrayal of trust on a scale I couldn't comprehend. It was about a real crime. I had started this journey to reclaim the dignity of a father. But now I realized I was standing before a monster far larger than I had ever imagined. And I knew, no matter how scared I was, I couldn't turn back now. Leaving the coffee shop that day, I felt like I was walking through someone else's world. The rain had stopped, leaving shimmering puddles on the sidewalk that reflected a dull, indifferent sky. But inside me, a storm had just broken. The truth Alan revealed didn't bring relief, but a terrible weight. A truth too vast and too cruel for one man to carry. This was no longer about a neglected father and a phantom allowance. It had morphed into a massive financial conspiracy, a viper coiled in the heart of the Sterling Corporation, and my son, the boy I had raised, was one of its two heads. I went back to my apartment, the USB drive from Alan feeling like a hot coal in my jacket pocket. Patricia had warned me not to plug it into my own computer, not to leave any digital trail. It was a bomb, and we had to decide when and how to detonate it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the headlights sweep across the wet street, trying to reconcile two images in my mind. The little boy, Michael, giggling as I taught him to ride his bike, and the man, Michael, approving phantom invoices to steal from the very family that had embraced him. The two couldn't coexist, and yet they were one and the same. The next morning, I met Patricia at her office. Her face was grim as I relayed Alan's entire story. She plugged the USB drive into a dedicated air-gapped laptop, and together we went through the evidence. The emails, the spreadsheets, the wire transfers, they unspooled across the screen like an irrefutable indictment. Patricia worked methodically, copying everything to an encrypted hard drive, her face unreadable. But I could see the tension in the way she gripped her pen. When she was done, she leaned back and looked at me for a long moment. "Richard," she said, her voice low and firm, "your case has just changed completely. This is no longer a civil suit about financial abuse. This is a criminal case of embezzlement and organized fraud. Your son and his wife could be facing years in prison." Prison. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. For all that Michael had done, the thought of him behind bars still twisted something deep inside me. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Now," Patricia said, "we build a pincer movement. We'll attack from two directions at once. One public, to apply pressure and make them panic, and one private, to strike where they least expect it." She explained the strategy. The first pincer was public opinion. "I want you to tell your story, Richard. Not the whole conspiracy, just your personal story. The Christmas party, the fake allowance, the eviction notice. Write it honestly, from the heart of a wounded father. Post it on an online forum, a place where ordinary people can read and share it. When Michael and Sophia see your story spreading, they will panic. And people who panic make mistakes." The thought of exposing my pain for the world to see made me flinch. It was a kind of nakedness I wasn't used to. I don't know if I can do that," I admitted. "You can," Patricia affirmed, "because you're not just doing this for you anymore. You're doing it for all the other invisible fathers and mothers out there, suffering in silence." That night, I sat in front of my old laptop, the blank screen like a white wall. I started and deleted my story a dozen times. How could I describe this pain without sounding like I was whining? How could I talk about betrayal without being dismissed as bitter? Finally, I decided to take Patricia's advice. I just wrote the truth, as simply as I could. My title was, "At his Christmas party, my millionaire son asked if I'd gotten my $8,000 allowance. I was confused, and then my daughter-in-law froze." I wrote about the borrowed suit, the taste of canned beans, the cold of my old Ford. I wrote about feeling invisible in a room full of successful people. I didn't use Michael's or Sophia's names, just my son and his wife. I ended the post with a simple question. If the world is applauding your child's devotion, while you're counting pennies to survive, what do you do? I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and hit post. It felt like jumping off a cliff, not knowing if the water below was deep enough. At first, nothing happened. My post was a drop in the digital ocean. But then, a few hours later, the first comment appeared. "I believe you," a stranger wrote. Then another. "Your story brought tears to my eyes." My own father went through something similar. By the next morning, the post had hundreds of comments and thousands of shares. Stories poured in from all over. A woman told of how her daughter took her life savings, claiming it was for an investment. A man wrote about his son using his name to take out a massive loan. I read every single comment, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. My pain had a name, a shape, and it was shared by countless others. That feeling of being understood gave me a strength I didn't know I had. Just as Patricia predicted, they reacted. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Michael. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared without any greeting. "Do you have any idea what that stupid post is causing? People are sending it to me. They're talking. You're ruining me." I switched on the recorder in my pocket. "I'm just telling the truth, Michael." "The truth?" "The truth is, you're slandering your own family in public. Do you know how furious Sophia is? Take it down, now." "I'm not taking it down," I said, my voice so calm it surprised me. "If you want it to go away, then make it a lie. Show me the bank statements for that structure you talked about. Show me where the $8,000 went." He went silent, save for the sound of his ragged breathing. "You're going to regret this," he hissed, and hung up. I saved the recording. The first pincer was closing. Meanwhile, Patricia deployed the second pincer, a much bolder and more dangerous move. She couldn't go to Mr. Sterling directly. That would be seen as a declaration of war and give them time to hide the evidence. She needed an intermediary. Someone Mr. Sterling both trusted and respected. She found him, a retired federal judge who had served as senior legal counsel for the Sterling Corporation and was now Mr. Sterling's golfing buddy. Patricia prepared a blind summary of the case, presenting only the cold, hard facts. A secret subsidiary, fraudulent invoices, embezzled charity funds, all approved by a senior executive. She gave it to the judge and said, "Mr. Sterling needs to know there is a time bomb ticking at the heart of his company, one that could destroy the reputation he spent a lifetime building." A few days later, Patricia got a call. Mr. Sterling wanted to meet with her, alone, at a discreet private club. Patricia told me about the meeting later. Mr. Sterling, a man who radiated power even when sitting still, listened to her presentation without interruption. She laid the core pieces of evidence from the USB drive on the table. A fraudulent invoice from ST Holdings, an email from Sophia directing how to hide a payment, and a charity wire transfer signed by Michael that flowed into his wife's account. Mr. Sterling's expression never changed. He just stared at the papers, his blue eyes as cold as ice. When Patricia finished, he was silent for a long time. "Why are you bringing this to me?" he finally asked, his voice a low, even growl. "Because this isn't just about your son-in-law," Patricia replied. "This is about your corporation, your reputation. And I believe you are a man of integrity who will not tolerate theft, even from within your own family." Mr. Sterling looked at her, a look as sharp as a scalpel. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "These documents will stay here. This will be handled internally. I will not have a family scandal destroy my company. You may leave." Patricia knew that wasn't a dismissal. It was a promise. The second pincer had snapped shut. The following weeks were a war of nerves. My post continued to spread, picked up by small news sites and bloggers. I became an unwilling symbol for forgotten parents. I received messages of support, but also anonymous threats and vile comments from troll accounts, undoubtedly orchestrated by Sophia. Meanwhile, Michael and Sophia were feeling the heat from both sides. Publicly, they were being condemned. Internally, a surprise internal audit was launched at the company. Accounts were frozen. Projects were suspended. Mr. Sterling said nothing to them, but his silence was more terrifying than any reprimand. They were trapped. And then, in a final desperate gamble, they decided to throw a party. A massive investor appreciation gala at the very same club where the first charade had taken place. The purpose was transparent. A show of force, an attempt to prove to the world that the rumors were lies, that the Bell Sterling family was strong and united. It was a brazen challenge. They sent an invitation to my apartment. The thick, gold-embossed cardstock felt like a slap in the face. Mr. Richard Bell is cordially invited. I took it to Patricia. "They're daring us," I said. "Yes," she smiled, the smile of a grandmaster. "They're inviting us into a trap. But they don't realize that we are the hunters. They have set the perfect stage for their own downfall." She looked at me. "Are you going, Richard?" I looked at the invitation. I thought of the borrowed suit, the feeling of invisibility, the humiliation. And then I thought of the people who had written to me, of Janet, of Alan, of Patricia. I wasn't alone anymore. "I'm going," I said. "But this time I won't be wearing a borrowed suit. And I will not be invisible." The invitation sat on my kitchen table like a gilded hand grenade. For days I circled it, looked at it, felt the weight of its brazen challenge. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a declaration of war. A part of me, the part that was tired and craved peace, wanted to throw it in the trash, to lock my door and let Michael and Sophia's loud, false world implode on its own. But I knew I couldn't. Patricia was right. They had set a stage, and to refuse to step onto it would be seen as an act of fear, a tacit admission that my story wasn't strong enough to face the spotlight. It would be a victory for them, a quiet one, and I had lived in silence long enough. On the day of the party, I didn't go to a rental shop. That belonged to a different man, a past version of Richard Bell who was still trying to play a role that wasn't his. Instead, I went to a modest department store downtown where ordinary men shopped. I used a small portion of the meager savings I'd scraped together over years of extra shifts and skipped meals and bought a new suit. It wasn't Italian or British. The fabric was a simple wool blend, not gleaming silk, but it had one quality the borrowed suit never could. It was mine. It fit perfectly. When I put it on, standing before the cracked mirror in my bathroom, I didn't see a tired janitor trying to hide his poverty. I saw Richard Bell, a man with a story, and that story, like this suit, deserved to be heard. The country club was just as opulent as the first time, but tonight, the glamorous veneer seemed thinner, more brittle. The crystal chandeliers still glittered, but they cast longer, sharper shadows on the floor like grasping fingers. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, an awkward silence that threaded through the laughter and the clinking glasses. The rumors had done their work. My post, shared from forum to blog, had planted seeds of doubt, and they were sprouting in the quick, averted glances, in the hushed conversations behind feathered fans, in the way people kept a safe distance from the evening's hosts. Michael and Sophia were playing the part of the perfect hosts, but it was the performance of actors who had forgotten their lines. Michael moved from group to group, his smile still bright, but it was stiff and didn't reach his tired, shadowed eyes. He laughed a little too loudly at a weak joke, the wine glass in his hand trembling ever so slightly. Sophia, stunning in a severe black gown, was like a queen trying to command a court on the verge of rebellion. Every gesture was calculated, every smile a weapon. But I could see the tightness in her jaw, the vigilant look in her eyes as they constantly scanned the room, searching for threats. When I walked in, a brief but noticeable hush fell over the entrance. This time, people knew who I was. I was no longer Michael Bell's anonymous shadow. I was the father from the story. A few people looked away quickly. Others gave me awkward, hesitant nods. I saw Janet at a nearby table. She gave me a nod of encouragement, her red-framed glasses a small beacon in a sea of strangers. In another corner, Alan leaned against a pillar, nursing a glass of water, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second in a silent confirmation of his presence. We were a quiet coalition, small people who had decided the truth mattered more than safety. I found a seat, and Margaret Walsh, a prominent investor I had met at previous events, waved me over to her table. "Mr. Bell," she whispered, her voice firm, her intelligent eyes looking directly at me. "We've read, and we're watching. You are not alone in this room." Dinner was a stilted, formal affair. Courses were served and cleared, but no one seemed to be enjoying the food. The sound of silverware on china seemed sharp and loud. It was all a prelude to the main event. And then it came. Michael stepped onto the small stage and took the microphone. He launched into his speech, a well-rehearsed monologue about growth, potential, and a bright future for his investors. He spoke well, using big words like commitment, integrity, and core family values, and impressive numbers. But the room remained cold. His words carried no weight anymore, because a bigger question hung in the air. Can a man who lies about caring for his own father be trusted to care for other people's money? When he finished, the applause was scattered and obligatory, lacking the warmth of the Christmas party. It died out quickly, leaving a fragile, expectant silence. And that's when I stood up. I didn't walk fast, and I didn't walk slow. I moved toward the stage with a calmness that surprised even me. Every footstep on the marble floor seemed to echo in the silence. All movement in the room stopped. Every eye was on me. Michael froze, his face draining of all color. Sophia stared at me, her eyes narrowed to icy slits, her hand gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. The club manager started to move to intercept me, but a slight shake of the head from Margaret Walsh stopped him in his tracks. I didn't snatch the microphone from Michael's hand. I simply stood beside him, facing the crowd, letting the contrast between us speak for itself. The son in the silk suit, and the father in the wool blend. "Good evening," I began, my unamplified voice carrying surprisingly well in the hush. "The last time I stood in this room, I was wearing a borrowed suit. Tonight, this suit is my own. It isn't expensive, but it fits." I paused, letting the words sink in. The last time I was here, I heard my son tell a beautiful story about filial piety. A story about $8,000 a month. It was a story that earned him a great deal of applause and admiration. It was a good story. The only problem was, it wasn't true. A collective murmur went through the crowd, like wind through dry leaves. "The truth," I continued, my voice steady, "is that my old Ford still has a broken heater. The truth is that my dinner is often from a can. The truth is that I received an eviction notice from my apartment not long after that party." I looked directly at Michael, who stood like a statue, his face a mask of disbelief. "I'm not here to make accusations," I said, and now I turned back to the crowd, to the curious, skeptical faces. "I'm only here to ask a question. Between the story told under crystal chandeliers and the truth that exists in a cold apartment, which do you believe?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took the small digital recorder out of my pocket and pressed play. The silence in the room became absolute. Michael's raw, angry voice filled the space, sharp and naked. "You're ruining me. Take it down, now." Then, Sophia's voice, sickly sweet and condescending. "Richard, I know at your age, we can sometimes forget financial details. Perhaps you signed some power of attorney papers you don't recall?" Every word was another nail in the coffin of their lies. A waiter dropped a fork, and the metallic clatter sounded like a gunshot. Sophia looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Michael looked like he was about to faint. And then, as the recording ended, something unexpected happened. Mr. Sterling, who had been sitting silently at the head table all evening, slowly rose to his feet. He didn't look at me, nor at his daughter or son-in-law. He walked to the stage with the regal bearing of a king. The entire room held its breath. Everyone expected him to defend his family, to put out the fire I had just started. He took the second microphone. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at Michael, a cold, appraising stare. "In light of serious internal matters that have recently come to light," he said, his voice like cold steel, devoid of all emotion, "the board has decided, and I, as chairman, am announcing. Michael Bell is suspended from all duties and privileges at the Sterling Corporation, effective immediately, pending the results of a full and comprehensive investigation." A collective gasp swept the room, followed by a dead silence. Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He gestured to the side of the stage, where two security guards in black suits had materialized as if from nowhere. "Security," he commanded. "We'll escort Mr. Bell from the premises." It was the killing blow. Michael's entire world collapsed in that single moment, publicly and ruthlessly executed by the very man he had tried so desperately to impress. The room erupted into chaos. Investors shot to their feet, cell phones appearing, frantic calls being made. Financial reporters who were in attendance scrambled for the exits. The party was over. The performance was done. Sophia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at Michael, not with disappointment, but with an expression of pure disgust, as if looking at the worst investment of her life. Then she turned on her heel, cut a path through the panicked crowd, and disappeared, leaving her husband to face his humiliation alone. The two security guards moved in, flanking Michael. He didn't resist. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut, his eyes vacant and lifeless. As they led him past me, he didn't look at me. He looked through me, as if I weren't there. And in that moment, I felt no triumph. Only a bottomless sorrow for the boy I had lost so long ago. The next day, Patricia filed for an emergency preservation order, preventing the Sterling Corporation and any entities connected to Michael and Sophia from destroying any documents. Michael Bell's name was on the front page of every financial paper. The Sterling Corporation's stock plummeted. That evening, I got a call from Maria. She whispered into the phone, her voice shaking with fear. "Mr. Bell, I heard them. They had a terrible fight before Mr. Sterling arrived. Mrs. Sophia was screaming at him. She called him useless. She said, 'I told you the plan was perfect. You were the only weak link. You let a miserable old man ruin everything.' Their partnership, built on greed and deceit, had shattered into blame. My story ends here, but the battle does not." Early the next morning, before the sun had risen, I stood at my apartment window with a hot cup of coffee. In the distance, toward downtown, I could see flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the skyscrapers. They were silent from this distance, but I knew what they meant. The police were serving warrants. I had started a fight that was now far beyond my control. I only wanted to reclaim the truth of my own life, but I had inadvertently lit a fire that might burn down an entire empire. The truth was out, but the legal war, a much larger one, was only just beginning. And I, Richard Bell, the once invisible man, was now standing at the very center of the storm. If you found this story compelling, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear our next story, click on the box on the left of your screen. Thank you for watching.